I'm Laura Chandler, and I'm here with poet Kim Rosen and composer and electric cellist Jami Sieber, and they've released a beautiful new recording of spoken word put to music called Feast of Losses. Welcome, Kim and Jami.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. Great to be here.
Great to have you guys. So this album is a combination of poems about life and loss, grief and joy, written by some very well-known poets like Mary Oliver, Stanley Kunitz, and one of my favorites, Lucille Clifton. And these are read by Kim and put to music by Jami. So it's an immersive experience of language and music with the very specific intention of healing. So can you tell me what brought you two together to make this album?
Well, thank you for asking, because it's been quite a journey. First off, just for background, Kim and I have been doing deep, immersive poetry and music dives for about 20 years, a little over 20 years, workshops. We have an earlier album that came out in 2007, Only Breath. And so we've been, over the years, kind of honing and honing our own collaborative relationship, as well as finding a trust in the process of co-creating, which has been really beautiful. And, given what's happened over the last 3 years, it's kind of hard to look the other way in terms of the grief and the sorrow and the loss. And then also given what's happened in the last 65 years for Kim and I, is we've been aging.
Yeah.
And that's been a blessing and also a learning curve. So Kim approached me about a year and a half ago and said, I want to do this album. I want to, around grief and loss and death and aging. And I would love for you to do the music. And how can I turn that down? It's one of I'm Wednesday's child, which is full of woe. I have to do something that has to do with grief. So, and I play the cello. So we spent a year going into these deep immersive dives. And I don't know if you want to talk to them about them, Kim.
Well, we had a great good fortune of being able to go to the coast of Washington. For how many times did we go? Did we go 4 times?
Yeah.
For 4 to 5 day retreats together. And the only thing that happened other than eating some really good food during those retreats, was that every morning for about 2 or 3 hours, Jami would pick up her wand, I want to say, her bow, and I would gather inside me, because I speak the poems by heart, but I'd gather inside me an awareness of the poems that were alive in me that day. And we didn't know what was going to happen. And we never really know what's going to happen, but this was just such a great joy of entering into the unknown at the lip of the ocean with the eagles flying around, with nothing to do. I mean, that's such a precious thing in this day and age of attention deficit in all directions. Nothing to do but listen to each other, yes, but listen through each other's art to the art that wanted to come through us and meet. And so we came up with, I can't even remember, I want to say like 35 or 40 hours worth of, maybe it wasn't that much, but it was almost that much worth of material. And when the baby's first born, you love it. So, and hopefully for a while after that too, but it was hard to pick what we were going to do. And we came out with 2 hours of material that we wanted to hone into something we could give the world.
Mhm.
Um, and I think we both felt this way, but I articulated it for myself as this is the footprint I want to leave on the planet when I,
Mhm.
do you know, I will all leave lots of footprints, some to the benefit of others and some not. But this is one of the footprints of my beingness that I want to leave here. And I know Jami's music is the music of my being, and it's such a privilege to be able to speak poetry to it.
Mm, mm. So, such a beautiful sentiment and a beautiful album. I just want to make sure I put that up there for anyone who's watching the video version of this. And you speak to this, this grief and this loss that we all experience, and that we've been experiencing even seems even more intensely in recent times. And our society is not one that has been particularly open to that conversation. And yet many traditions are open to that conversation. And it's something that's missing and something that's needed. And your album certainly is a beautiful offering and entry into that conversation. So if we could talk a little bit more about your perspective on that and your intentions with bringing this to people, for the purposes of opening. And maybe Kim, we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, it really, I think it was, I think it was Jamie's phrase where we started talking about inviting people to create listening communities, communities of deep listening in which to listen to the album. Of course, you can listen to the album under any circumstances on your own or with others, but it's an incredibly potent way and also a gentle way to enter into the difficult conversations that, there's a lot of talk throughout, at least throughout the people I know. There's talk about death dinners and death cafes, and you can go online and download a list of questions to invite your friends over for dinner and just start to generate the muscle that can talk about these things, that can turn towards these things. And this is another way to do that. And it's a way, I think, for the both of us, forgive me if I'm speaking for you for a moment, but I think we're both very interested in the wisdom of the non-mental response to turning towards, and I could say, I would use the word almost the involuntary, the voluntary, involuntary. And when Jami's music comes in combination with the words of these great, great poets, there's a defenselessness that comes over us between that melts the veil that's usually there between us and our deepest feelings.
Mhm, mhm,
That's beautifully put, Kim. You know, I'm also reminded of, and I've been thinking about this lately, one of the lines in Stanley Kunitz's poem is, and which the album is named after, um, how shall the heart reconcile to its feast of losses?
mhm,
How shall the heart reconcile to its feast of losses? And I really believe through witnessing the experience of these deep listening parties that really how we can help reconcile these losses and this grief is through collective sharing,
mhm,
through the group gathering, through us sharing our hearts and our openness and our fears and our experiences already. Because many of us, if not most of us, are already losing our parents, our siblings, our friends. And as you said, Laura, we are encouraged to sort of muscle up and move forward. But the truth is, we can't isolate grief and shut it down. If you isolate and shut down grief, you're going to shut down joy. You're going to shut
Mhm.
down love. You're going to shut down all of those things that make us human and that make us a collective body.
Mm. Really well said. Really well said. And just recognizing the aspect of living and dying, that we're always dying to ourselves in some way and coming back again. And so we're always having a cycle of this, of loss, right? And so then we have practice always for grieving, so that it doesn't have to be this overwhelm. And I think that's part of what, you're inviting people to open to, is that this can be navigated. And to your point, Jami, when we close off to it, then we're suppressing it and it becomes harder. And so I want to second what Kim said about Jami's music as being, she knows I'm a big fan, and just being this opening, just this huge opening of heart and soul. And I really encourage people to get Feast of Losses, and also, your music, Jami, because it's deeply meditative and there's just something just magical about it. So when you're having this soundtrack of this music, there's a great opening and a relaxing into it. And then Kim's bringing in really incantation of these poems, the opening with voice, the opening with words, and there's another kind of opening that's occurring. And so it's just a beautiful combination that's happening. I don't know if you want to speak to that, Kim or Jami.
I think that although I don't know that it's ever been stated exactly like this, I think that my purpose in life with myself and others, and I suspect Jamie's as well, I want to be rendered defenseless against the natural flow of life within me. And all of life, whether you have a traumatic life or only a slightly traumatic life, and I'm not sure any of us get away without one of those two things. All of life to a certain point is about building up a way to move through that. Or you could say building up what are at times healthy defenses. I don't mean defenses as a negative thing. I mean defenses as a necessary thing. But at a certain point, those defenses become our prisons. That point can happen when you're 23 years old or when you're 83 years old. So it's not necessarily that these poems are only for the septuagenarians and octogenarians among us, although I bow deeply to how beautifully they have received it in my life anyway. But there, as you were saying, Laura, there are 100 little deaths per day that we can use as training wheels to render ourselves defenseless against the natural flow of life within us that is naturally healing when we let it flow. Right. So just to drop that in, and that the poet's job, I feel, is to surprise ourselves out of our minds. Even when it's a poem that you've heard 100 times, like a Mary Oliver poem, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Each time we're surprised out of our minds and something else happens. And music does that much more directly than poetry. Um, so that's what I hope we're doing here is rendering ourselves and all of our listeners defenseless against the true organic flow of life within us.
Well, and I have to add also that someone once in a workshop of ours said, music is the enzyme that helps me digest the poems in such a deep way. And Kim speaking of poems, the vocal quality as well as her vocal quality, as well as just the inflection and the way that you, Kim, hold each word, I feel is such a deep medicine for people like me who never really considered myself able to understand poetry. I would look at poems and go, well, that's nice, but I don't really get it, you know? And through the process of hearing Kim speak them and then creating music, I just feel like live in the poems in a different way.
Mm.
And that surprise, that aha that Kim speaks about is just such a beautiful awakening.
Well, I think I love that you say that, Jamie, because I think it's like literally living in the poems in a different way because music brings us into our body, our
Mm.
flesh, our breath, our pulsations of blood, our bone. It resonates inside our bones. And really, that's where a poem belongs also. Although, because it arrives in words, sometimes when we have only the words, the mind thinks, oh, this is my domain. And as Billy Collins says, I'm going to quote it badly, we think we have to beat it with a hose until it tells us what it means. You know, live inside us like a lover, or a piece of music.
Mm. Well, I love that idea of rendering ourselves surprised.
Mhm.
And I hear you on the idea of, this defenselessness. And I'd almost want to say, you know, undefended, because it's not that we're defenseless even. So we're undefended to life. We can
Mm,
be undefended to life. And sometimes, as you said, there can be traumas, there can be things that we're going to need some time with. We're going to have to digest, we're going to have to process.
mhm,
But the idea that you're pointing to is that, but we keep moving and we keep holding open and allowing ourselves to meet those, if we do get those defenses, helping to heal them so that we can then be undefended, so we're undefended to each other, and I think that, for me is probably the bravest way to live. And
mm,
it's brave, and yet it's also just natural too. So when we enter this conversation, this is where you take me. So
yeah,
thank you. And so here we are, in the heart of creativity. This, you both are just such creative beings, and we're all creative beings. I don't want to take that away from anyone, but you live in your creative selves. You bring this beauty and, insight and practice to the world. And so I would love to hear a little bit more about each of your creative processes and how it affects you.
mm. Wow, that's a big question. For me, my creative process is really informed by my dear friend Charlie Murphy, who I did music with for years in a band, Rumors of the Big Wave. And that was a political social justice pop rock band, spiritual too. And oh yeah, spiritual too. But anyway, we did music that had to do with social issues, social justice, social change. And so for me, my personal creative life really, after growing up learning cello in the classical world, really was steeped in music that speaks to who we are in this world and how we relate to each other as humans. Um, and I recently saw a quote by Paul Robeson: "Artists are the gatekeepers of truth,"
Mm.
and and that is sort of like at the heart of my creativity. Not that I really know that I know the essence of truth or always know the truth, but I'm trying to speak and create from a place that is authentic and that is, in some ways, reflecting what is happening in our world. And that's why at this moment in time, this album was such a gift to me, not only to offer it, um, its beauty and important poems to the world, but also for me personally, it was a deep healing for tremendous grief and trauma I felt from the losses from COVID, the racial killings, the rise of white supremacy, the fall of our democracy. I mean, on and on and on it has been going.
Mhm.
And so that's really inspiring what I do these days as a creative being. And how can I be of service? How can I create in some way that speaks to my true heart?
Mm. Beautiful. And Kim, how about you?
Well, it's a great question, Laura, and it's actually asking me to look. It's actually asking me to stretch my inquiry muscle in a direction I haven't really thought about. There's so many ways I could answer that, but one of them is mostly I speak poems with Jami that have been written by other people, many of whom I've known personally, which is, my great good fortune is to have been friends with some extraordinary poets like Ellen Bass and Marie Howe and Stanley Kunitz, who I met before he died, and Lucille Clifton.
Mm.
Um, and it's odd that in the culture that I come in contact with, a lot of people don't recognize the speaking of poems by other people as a creative process. Um, Although if Jami decided to play Bach, they would recognize it as a creative process,
Mm.
recognize it as a way of celebrating Jaminess and celebrating Bachness at the time, um, and in no way stealing anything from Bach because she was playing it, right? But with poems, it doesn't always work that way. And I need to think more about why that is, and there's a lot of reasons. But for me, it's the most pleasurable flow that I have in my life is when I'm speaking a poem, particularly when I'm speaking it in collaboration with a piece of music by Jami. It's like all your little iron filings line up inside. When you put two magnets at different ends of a mess of iron filings and they all kind of line up.
Yeah.
All my iron filings line up when I'm speaking a poem. I feel that I'm doing what I was put on this earth to do. I'm speaking what I was put on this earth to speak. And it's a precious experience. I spend a lot of my time doing other creative things that I love, like going over spreadsheets for the nonprofit that I run. Uh, and writing my own poetry. And both of those are experiences like this. The creative experience feels like a lot of hard work. But when I'm speaking poems with Jami, it's just the most beautiful holiday. It's like swimming with the dolphins with unlimited breath. It's so precious. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I appreciate going in that direction with you both.
Yes, yes, and I want to
Yeah.
I want to stay on that topic a little bit, because it's interesting to me, and I understand this, but it's interesting to me that people would perhaps not think of reading someone else's poem aloud as a creative expression, and I I really like to believe that is not true of everyone. I'm sure it's not true of everyone, which is also, I think, why when I introduced you, I said spoken word and music, and I didn't just say poetry. Although, poetry has a long history, as you know, of being handed down in an oral tradition. So it's not a history of people only reading their own poems. And so the beauty of someone who can express, you know, a poem with their voice and their the feeling that they're able to bring through. I mean, that's performance in a way. I mean, it is performance, right? So,
Mhm.
you have the songwriters, we'll go back to music, who maybe can't perform, you know, and they sell their songs and other people do them. So when you have a talent for speaking it, it's an embodied experience, and you can, and I hear it in this album, when you speak. So I thank you for that.
That's a very interesting analogy and a beautiful reflection. Yeah, and yes, it's an honor to speak the poems, the words of the poets that I love. And it happens that the poets I love, I would say, I think I'm going to tell the truth. I would say all the poets on this album are modern poets. All of
Mhm.
them have been alive within the last, I'm not sure if this is accurate, but within the last 15 years, they've all been alive,
Mm.
and many of them still
Mm.
are. So it's a little different than speaking Rumi or Shakespeare or Keats.
Yeah.
And uh, and it's part of um, my yearning to open up the minds and hearts of people who maybe they love poetry, but it was a poem that was written in the 12th century or in the 18th century, to let them know that there are poets out there who are speaking to what we're living right now with, dare I say it, as much brilliance, as much genius and beauty as a Shakespeare or a Keats.
Mm.
Mhm.
Mm. Mhm.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that. And in terms of the creative process for you both, and I appreciate your experience of it, I'm just wondering how it affects you. Like, what is your personal, there's the relationship to bringing it out, to the, sharing it. And also, does it have any other effect for you personally? And, maybe you've already answered that, but I like the idea of it.
Well, I can say, it's messed with my shoulders, my
Oh,
hands.
yeah,
I mean, to be real,
yeah,
playing the cello and carting around heavy gear for the
yeah.
last 45, 50 years. Um, but in all seriousness and love for what I do, there's no joy greater than playing something and going, yes, it's exactly what I wanted to express. It's like exactly like where whether anyone is present or not, it doesn't matter. It's just like this feeling of that's exactly where I want to be, and
Mhm.
I love that feeling. And on the other side of it, sometimes it, like with any creative process, it can also be scary when the muse does not appear, you know, and it feels like, as Kim was saying, you know, like you're, you know, jagged and, you know, trying to put blocks into a square. There are those times, but
Mm,
when it lines up, it's just incredible.
mm, mhm, mhm.
Yes, and for me, I wrote a book. I don't know if you're aware of it, Laura, called "Saved by a Poem," and it's
Yes.
really about the life-saving practice of taking poems to heart. It's not so much about writing, although people write me and they say, "Well, this totally jump-started my own writing," which is great, but that's not what the book is about. The book is about the literal and even physiological, not to mention mental, emotional, and spiritual um, muscularity that gets ignited in taking a poem into your life as a friend, learning it by heart if you choose to, the way the Buddha's first students learned the Buddha's words by heart because they were illiterate. So they learned the words by heart in order to pass it down. And they knew that it was rearranging the synaptic connections within their bodies to have those words running through them. So
Mhm.
my darkest times, of which there have been many, even very recently, if I start to speak a poem that I know by heart, it all falls away and my energies line up and my channel to a greater sense of self opens. So it's like having the Quran inside of you or having the Lord's Prayer inside of you. It does reroute myself. And then the second thing I want to say is that in the work with Jami, um, and also Evan, the engineer, and the other musicians who are on the album, often poetry can be a solitary phenomenon.
Mhm.
And even self work and inner work can be a solitary phenomenon. But for me, the practice of collaboration has been one of the supreme gifts of my life, as I'm sure almost everybody who's listening to this will know of some kind of collaboration, whether it was on making a meal or making an album, that it's a miracle, that give and take. And it's so healing to both my own personal psychology that didn't come from an overtly collaborative household in my childhood, um, and also perhaps for our communities and our worlds.
Mm, thank you. You know, you both touch upon this a bit, which is like that alchemical aspect of creating and that internal experience of it. And you know, I'll just throw my thought into the mix here, if I can, as a poet and also a songwriter who was painfully um, self-conscious and shy to be performing. Got over that. But I think the great experience for me of creativity was that direct communing with this something larger. You know, when Jami, you mentioned the muse, and I always felt, you know, that alchemical thing happening, and like I had just been given a gift. And it wasn't just the gift of the song or the poem, but this whole, as Kim points out, embodied feeling of it. And it's like that is so healing in so many ways. And so I am aware of your book, Kim. In fact, we have a mutual friend who I'll mention after we finish here. And so I bought the book. I haven't gotten to read it yet, but I bought it recently because I became aware of it, and I should have been aware of it a long time ago, but I have to read a lot of books. So I'm very excited by it. And that idea of, you know, what you're doing both of you are just like, it's an invitation. So it's an invitation to be creative. It's an invitation to open to yourself, this album and your book, invitation. So I love all of that about the work that you both do. And so I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that.
No, I mean, I can't think of anything
Okay,
else. I don't know.
that's fine. But what I want to go to is you are both, you've mentioned doing a lot of collaborations together, concerts, you've done several albums together, and you also do retreats where you bring people together and you do, I'll let you guys explain it, but it's a beautiful offering and opportunity for people to come together and be in community.
Yeah, we started, we definitely jumped in with each other fast when we first met. We met in 2001 on Jami's birthday. And then I don't remember, a few weeks later, we gave our first concert together for which we had rehearsed for 2 hours. It was 4 hours of mad improvisation. It was the first time well, it wasn't exactly the first time I'd ever done that, but it was the first time I'd ever done it in such a professional situation. And I didn't know when to stop. And poor Jami and Michelle Carlitz, who was also with us, their fingers were like raw by the time but the audience was still there, which is amazing. We should go back and listen to that sometime. And shortly thereafter, I invited Jami to come and be a part of a 7-day retreat I had been giving every year in Hawaii. And it's a retreat of, it's a deep dive retreat. It's an inner vision quest. And of course, it's also an outer vision quest if you're going to Hawaii and planting yourself on the banks of a beach where the dolphins come in almost every day, which is what drew me. I won't go into the background, but I had led workshops with dolphins for a long time, meaning they led the workshops and I worked for them. And so we went, and really that circumstance showed us what our work was together. Because the group would wake up into silence in the morning. Sometimes the dolphins would be in the bay, and without speaking about it, people would go and swim with the dolphins. We'd come back into the circle at about 10 o'clock without speaking, silently into the circle. Jami would pick up her bow and start playing, and the two of us would improvise, either with me guiding meditations and movement or speaking poems. And to use the word you brought up, we discovered, as has been discovered throughout history, right back and past Homer, that when you bring music and words together, even the Peruvian shaman chant and beat a drum, when you bring those rhythms into a space together, consciousness shifts literally bioenergetically, biochemically. There are shifts that occur in the body that one of the effects of is that it disinhibits the mind. And this is a wonderful thing under these circumstances, because at a certain point, we invite people to pick up their pens and start writing in what I call a blurt style, in an uncensored way, whatever the poems have magnetized to the surface. And it can be very powerful, deep, inner, shamanic-like, breathwork-like journeys that come out in uncensored writing in circumstances when even the most uptight of us are rendered defenseless against the flow of their creativity. And so this has fascinated us, and we've done 1-day workshops, we've done 7-day workshops. We're about to do a 7-day workshop in Mexico, and everyone is invited. There are still 2 or 3 places open in the circle. let us know if you want to come. We'd love to have you, any of you.
That's
It's
great. Well,
April 28th,
April
April 20
28th.
or April 29th to May
6th.
6th. Yeah.
Exciting. And you do this every year.
Well,
Whoa.
this is our last year of doing it in Mexico.
Huh?
You know, this is our last retreat there, and we're looking for places here in the
Mhm.
states to do it. And you know, things are shifting. You know, we're trying to figure out what the next incarnation will look like and what it
Mm.
will be.
Yeah.
Oh, well, and I'm sure it will be amazing and beautiful, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And
Well, and Kim does many online events.
mm,
People can go to her website and
mhm.
she'll do poetry dives online.
Yes,
So
Mm,
that's,
we have free events at least
yeah.
twice a year online. And I actually give them with Jami, although Jami's not there. I call it Jami in the iPod because Jami's music carries a lot of the online work that I do as well.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, and we're going to have a link to both of your websites so people can get more information, both on our website and in the context of this interview. And so kind of on the subject of what's next and what you're all doing, Jami, you have some new interests, some new things that you've been branching out into. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing?
Sure. You know, one of the projects I've been invited into is with this company called Mobius Transformational Leadership. And they go around the world in these workshops, coaching CEOs or corporate people to really dive into trauma in an effort to bring their whole being into work. You know, you can't separate your personal life, your inner life from your work life. Um, Even if someone says you can do that, you can't.
Mm-hmm.
And so Mobius has been for, you know, almost 20 years working with corporations around the world. And Amy Fox saw me perform and invited me in to provide music in the same way that I do it with Kim in these workshops that creates a cauldron where people can journal, they can go on visualizations, they can just do a sound bath at certain points um, and incorporate the work that's brought in through these workshops. So I'm doing that. I'm also occasionally doing films. I just finished a film score and then we're still working to get this baby out, you know, Feast of Losses. We're still in the nursery with her and, you know, supporting her to fly around the world. And she has had a great birth and a great welcoming into this world. And we just want to provide it further.
Mm. I want to say that, you know, I purchased a number of the CDs to give as gifts, and I've I've given one to, I want to make sure I tell you this, to a group in Colorado of older women who are probably in their 80s who gather together, and they're very excited to do the group listening. So I
Mm.
will, she was going to tell me how it goes. So I'll keep you informed. But what a beautiful thing. It's just a beautiful thing.
Oh,
And
thank you.
yeah, and Kim, more on what you're doing now, and also you mentioned your foundation, which is just you know, such a meaningful foundation, the She Fund, and it's the Safe House Education Fund for Malawi girls escaping genital mutilation and other abuses. And you're doing such great work there in Kenya. And can you talk a little bit about that? And
Yes, it's actually Maasai girls in Kenya, um, and it started with a poem. Otherwise, I never would have gotten into it. It is not my skill set, as I mentioned, but human connection and heart to heart to heart is. my skill set. And if you're interested, you can go to the website and watch the movie about the first time I spoke a Mary Oliver poem to a group of Maasai girls in a mud building, a mud kitchen in Kenya, and we all fell in love. And one of them, who is now the director of the She Fund, but then she was a high school student, she said, "Who is this woman, Mary Oliver? Is she Maasai?"
Mm.
Which I think is the point of all poetry. Do you know that you can be among 50 runaway Maasai girls who had to escape female genital mutilation and grew up carrying firewood on their backs and herding the cows, and they can feel completely seen and heard by a poem by an American middle-class, middle-aged poet. A privileged American white middle-class, middle-aged poet. They can feel completely known by that poem. And it's grown into a beautiful initiative called the She Fund. We now have about 34 girls in school and maybe 21 graduates. If you're interested in it, I could go on and on about it. But I welcome any inquiries about it. I love to talk about it.
Well, it's such important work. It's such important work, and I just, I thank you for that. And you're both activists in your own way, and I thank you both for your contribution to the world and all the ways that you're making contribution and making yourselves available to assist because we need more. So thank you. And anything else that you'd like to say before we close, or you've got?
Well, I just want to say thank you, Laura. What you and Isa are doing with Sacred Stream is just so in line with the work that Kim and I do and what we're creating. So thank you for inviting us into this conversation and so quintessentially understanding it and where to go. So thank you.
No, thank you.
Beautifully said. And thank you, Jami, for introducing me to Laura and to Sacred Stream. The only thing I want to kind of leave hanging in the air is that out of those 40 hours of music that we came up with at the coast, we did cull 2 hours, and Feast of Losses is only 1 hour. There may it's our prayer and intention that there be volume 2 of this material that will come out sometime in the next, who knows, 3 to 4 years. I'm looking forward to that. And I'm very grateful to have this conversation. Thank you. It's been a joy to talk with you, and also because you asked us questions that I've not been asked. So that was
good. Well, it's my pleasure, and so wonderful to be, to share time with you and to share space with you. And I really look forward to being with you in person again sometime, both of you. So we'll meet, we'll have coffee, we'll go to the Sacred Stream, we'll do something. I look forward to more together and more from you both. Thank you.
Thank you,
Laura.